Hello! Welcome to the Freedom Guide for Music Creators Audio Edition. Hi, this is Deanne D. Matthews, author of the Freedom Guide for Music Creators. Now, in the audio edition, I'm not going to read it to you word for word. I know that you can do that on your own, but in each chapter we will be highlighting the most important key points, and if you want more detail, of course you're welcome to look into the book. In this introduction, we'll be discussing what we're going to cover in the Freedom Guide for Music Creators. This is an overview for you. Each of the chapters will have its own track, and there'll be multi-tracks inside, so that if there is a particular point that you want to hear again, you'll be able to go back and do that. But this is your overview of the entire book. In Chapter 1, which is titled Copyright, the Bedrock of the Music Business, we'll be discussing, copyright, what it is, why it matters, and what you do to protect yours. As a basic introduction, every time you write a song, you have created a copyright. And there are ways that you need to learn what that does and how to protect it. For example, a copyright is what's called an intellectual property. I'll explain that more in Chapter 1, but just understand for now. If you sell the device on which you are listening to this recording to someone, you've sold it one time and that's it, because it's a physical property. But an intellectual property can be licensed millions of times and sold millions of times. That's why you can write one song and have 10 million copies being sold. The understanding of intellectual property is one thing that separates the rich from the not so rich. And we will be discussing what copyright is, what intellectual property is, and how you protect the copyright connected to your songs in Chapter 1. Chapter 2 is entitled The Flip and Dangerous Side of Copyright. In the same way that you want to protect your copyright, other people also wish to protect theirs, so that when you use songs by other people, you need to know how to use their work and respect their copyright at the same time. This is an area that causes a lot of people's projects to be shut down. It's an area that creates a lot of lawsuits and just creates a lot of broken careers. But there are ways to avoid being caught up in copyright madness if you, from the beginning, make sure that you pick your songs and license them correctly. And this is what we'll be learning how to do in Chapter 2. Chapter 3 is simply called Royalties. Royalties are basically music money. There are at least 20 different kinds of music money or royalties that your music can create, but in this we'll be talking about the biggest 5 of them with an honorable mention to the 6th. That will be enough to start. In Chapter 4, we'll be discussing why the record companies are rich and you're not. Part 1. If you are an artist or a singer-songwriter, this is a very important chapter for you to read, because we'll be discussing the things in standard record contracts and standard record industry practices that have kept musicians poor and record industry businessmen rich. It is very important that you understand the concept of the advance and that you understand the concept of recoupment. In this chapter, we'll be covering that and other key issues. Chapter 5 is entitled, Why the Record Companies Are Rich and You're Not, Part 2. And this is for every musician in every field. Now, this chapter covers some uncomfortable areas. Only in February do most of us want to know anything about Black history. But there is a little known piece of African American history that took place during the period between the end of the Civil War and the Civil Rights Act that every musician needs to know about. Because every industry executive has a plan to put you into sharecropping. And that is, they plan to treat you the same way that they treated poor African Americans in the South through a system called sharecropping. You need to understand what that is, and that is in Chapter 5. Chapter 6 is called First, Free Your Mind. This chapter discusses how you go from thinking of yourself as a musician who is essentially going to sign up to sell away the value of your music, to be sharecropped and exploited, to becoming a musician who now is able to look at a world full of opportunity and be able to make their own way and to use the value of their music to serve others, and also receive in doing that the ability to be able to profit and make a livelihood from your music. But the first thing you have to know is change your mind. Be aware of what's happening in the industry and be aware that there are opportunities for you to thrive in spite of those things and to get the proper mindset to do that. Chapter 7, how to find millions, millions, and millions. Now, we're not talking about dollars yet, we're talking about opportunities. This chapter will discuss resources that are available to you as you begin to move your music forward, as you begin to look at places that you can go beside just going to the record industry. There are many, many resources available to you, and we'll be discussing some of them in this chapter. Chapter 8, when you do go and set up that online shop, there are many places online where you can make your music available for sale. We all know that. But there are some fundamental principles that you need to know before you do that. And this chapter will discuss both that and also social media marketing and also merchandise. What do you do if you begin to have fans that would like to have a t-shirt? There are some very fundamental principles that go with all those things that will be discussed in this chapter, chapter 8. Chapter 9 is called Please Don't Stop with This Book. Please! The Freedom Guide is meant to be the beginning of your journey of learning how to be a musician who is able to keep from being exploited and is beginning to make a lifestyle out of the music that you love. This is the first book that I hope that you read, but there are many, many other resources and learning opportunities. And chapter 9 is where I recommend the books that I really think are the very best as you start on your way. In Appendix A, how to make a project into a money magnet, we'll discuss a way to think out a project so that you can both hit the niche you're interested in and also expand your audience. And also we'll have a discussion of how to use what's called public domain music. This is also referenced in chapter 2, but it's revisited in Appendix A for a very specific reason. Appendix B contains selected international copyright offices and their addresses. Let's say, for example, that you are listening to this and you're in India. It doesn't do you any good to hear about how to register something for the Copyright Office in the United States. But we do have India covered in the Freedom Guide for Music Creators. And you can also find some other addresses if you're in Australia or Canada. There are also some other international addresses that you can find as well. Thank you for listening to the introduction. I look forward to discussing with you the material presented for you in the Freedom Guide.